Welcome to the Business of Story, where we connect you with the leading minds in the art of business storytelling. Learn from best-selling authors, Hollywood screenwriters, makers, content marketers, and brand raconteurs on how to craft and sell compelling stories that sell. The Business of Story is brought to you by Oracle Marketing Cloud, helping businesses use the latest marketing technologies to tell their stories and connect with their customers. Emma, which provides innovative email marketing tools and services that drive brilliant results. Act Content Management Software, organizing all your prospect details in one place so you can prioritize your day and market more effectively. And by Convince and Convert, digital marketing advisors and counselors to leading brands and organizations worldwide. Convince and Convert helps you gain and keep your customers online. Here's your host, Park Howell.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, and my job here is to connect you with the top storytelling minds in business who share tips and techniques to drive growth for your professional services firm through, you guessed it, the power of story. Now, my goal here, either through this podcast or working with you one-on-one, is to reignite your one true superpower, storytelling, so you can nudge the world in any direction you choose. And you can learn more about this at businessofstory.com. Now, on today's show, we have an amazing story artist from London, John Yorke. John is a drama producer, author, and teacher who has spent 30 years studying our insatiable appetite for stories. He is the founder of the BBC's Writers Academy, and a current TV show he is working on, Wolf Hall, has won a 2016 Golden Globe. His long career in TV drama has given him the tools to identify the underlying shape common to all successful narratives, from drama to corporate reports to business marketing. I first read John's book on story structure called Into the Woods about a year ago. It is one of the best resources I've found that combines theatrical story structure and storytelling with how we can all use it in our own personal and professional lives in our quests to gain things out there. So on today's show, John discusses why stories work on us, thanks to our mirror neurons, and how you, as a business communicator, can be more effective with your stories. We'll also look at what happens when you realize that all business stories are quests and how that knowledge will shape how you approach your marketing. And then, of course, at the end, the 3 big mistakes we all make as business storytellers and how we can quickly overcome them to craft and tell compelling stories that sell. So let's begin this episode of Business of Story with our friend, John Yorke. John, welcome to the Business of Story.
Hello there. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here. I read your book, Into the Woods, about this time last year. And then when I heard we were fortunate enough to have you on the show, I got a chance to go back through it again this week. And it's just a wonderful book. But before we get to that, you've got 30 years in the storytelling business. And I guess I'm your contemporary. I've got 30 years in the storytelling business, but in advertising and marketing. Yours is definitely in the entertainment field.
Absolutely.
How did you get your start? And how did you get to where you are today?
Now there's a question. I was always fascinated by narrative. I mean, from very early years, I had a father who was obsessed with making me read religiously, and so storytelling was just part of my growing up. I wanted to work in television from an early age, but I couldn't get a job. So the nice thing in England was there were a lot of jobs going at that time in radio. So I kind of got into radio. And I worked on, there's a wonderful speech network, BBC network called Radio 4, which I started to realize after a while was everything they did was, be it history, be it news, be it current affairs, it was all storytelling. And I worked initially as a sound engineer, but I was exposed to storytelling all the time. And I just started to think there's a real art to this, and I want to know more about it. So that's how I got into it.
Radio, I guess I kind of got my start in radio as well. I was working for an agency when I first moved to Phoenix back in 1985, and we did massive amounts of radio commercials. And I wrote and produced radio commercials, and I loved it. It's still today is my favorite medium because you have the theater of the mind, and you can paint pictures or get your audiences to paint pictures depending on where you take them within those those radio spots.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they always say, don't they, the pictures are better.
You then have moved on to the BBC and have been with the BBC for quite some time and even have a writers' academy there.
That's right. Well, I moved into telly in the early 90s. And again, I was just exposed to, initially, bizarrely, in soap opera, which I always liken to working in an ER. You just get injured script after injured script after injured script coming in, and you have to fix it. You have to sort of put the paddles on and bring it to life really quickly. And if you can master that stuff, you start to realize, what the tricks of the trade are. And that was really my start in television. And then, over the years, I just worked my way up, found myself working in what we would call over here the more art house side of things. So I moved from very, very populist storytelling to quite art house stuff. And I ended up running drama at Channel 4, which is our big alternative channel here. And then I was working with, some of the great British writers. And I was just in an amazing place to watch and learn and ask hundreds of quite annoying questions.
Quite annoying questions to fix injured scripts. I love that. And did I read on your website correctly that you and your team have recently won a Golden Globe for the Wolf Hall program?
Yeah, that's right. No, that's been lovely to get. Wolf Hall is a rather extraordinary show to work on, and the writer Peter Strawn, who I'm sure most of your listeners will know, and he adapted Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy as well. He's just an extraordinary craftsman, and I can proudly say that my main contribution to Wolf Hall, apart from being managing director of the firm that made it, was to give almost no notes whatsoever, because the script was beautiful. And when you get a great script, when the storytelling's perfect, the worst thing you can do is fiddle around with it. So I'm quite proud that I made almost no contribution whatsoever.
So in that case, if in the fixing the injured scripts you talked about earlier, what are the one or two or three mistakes writers make, not only in, theatrical storytelling, but in business storytelling?
My big bugbears, there's two, but the big one is exposition, is over-explanation, is a need to explain where actually there's no need to explain at all. It seems storytelling works much more powerfully when the message is inferred. So it's the audience doing the work. It's that old adage of you give the audience 2 + 2 and they will add it together themselves, and that way they're actively involved and much, much closer to the material. And the other, which I think is equally important in both areas, in business and in fiction, is empathy. It's like, you have to love your protagonist. If you don't love your protagonist, nothing else is going to work. So it's all about how you get empathy, and you can get it in all kinds of surprising ways.
And how do you go about that? How do you find empathy? Well,
there's a writer over here called Russell T Davies who for years has written a show called Doctor Who, and he argues actually the worst way to find it is to think about it, because and I think there's some logic to that. I think empathy is born out of love, and I think if you love what you're writing, if you are absolutely in love with what you're writing, that normally translates. If in fictional terms, if you don't love your characters, nobody else will. But if you do, and you have the craft skills necessary to do it, then actually everything works. Everything clicks into shape. There are some obvious rules. I think it's really interesting just looking at fiction this year. 2 films that everyone predicted would do really well in the Oscars: Black Mass, about Whitey Bulger in Boston, and The Program, the movie about Lance Armstrong, both died. And I think that the reason for that is obvious, is in the end, there was nothing there to love. Mm-hmm. And if there's nothing there to love, it's the same in business, is you need to love, or love's a complex word, but you need to love the person giving the message.
So in business, how does that translate over? I know we often tell our clients and the listeners to have empathy for your audience and place them at the center of the story. How do you coach that?
Well, when I talk to business people, I think you know absolutely. First rule is who are you talking to, and what are you trying to get across. But also, I remind them that they're only going to come on the journey if they believe in you. So it's how you present your message. Funnily enough, there's a speech I use. Which always seems to work brilliantly, and it bizarrely is by Ronald Reagan, and technically not business, but what he's doing is selling a very, very early version of neoliberalism. It's a speech he made, some of your listeners may know it, in 1964 when he was supporting Barry Goldwater, and although the campaign was a disaster for Barry Goldwater, Reagan came out of it, and you could see the seeds of a future president. And whether you agree with him politically or not, he did something really amazing, which is he did two things. He made you feel like you were on his side, like he was you, that we were all in this together. And he did this largely by the way he built up the enemy. And he described the enemy, the antagonist, if you like, the thing we had to defeat, in such a way that whatever your politics, you went, yeah, you're right. And I will come on this journey because that is worth defeating. So part of the skill of these things is allowing the audience to identify with you, and then the speaker to take you on the journey to defeat the enemy, who, like Darth Vader, is the person yes, we've got to kill that at all costs. And in business, Darth Vader becomes working practices or, sloth or health and efficiency issues, anything you like, really. But it's those principles seem to me fundamental in fiction and in business is you identify with a hero and you go on a journey to defeat the bad guy.
Well, tell us a little bit about your book. How would you describe Into the Woods? And what was your whole motive behind writing it?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'd read quite a few screenwriting books, and I'd struggled with them a bit. Although, realizing that there was some sensible stuff in Robert McKee and Sid Field, Christopher Vogler, people like that. And I learned quite a lot from them. I found after a while I was getting quite frustrated because there was no real rigorously academic approach. The one thing I'd been taught when I was a student was you have to prove what you say. You have to absolutely back it up with evidence. And what I found with all of those books was there was no why. Not once that there was a lot of there has to be an inciting incident on page 22, but not one of them could explain why or why an inciting incident existed. So I couldn't find anything that told me why structure existed and why it was the shape it was. And so that was really the beginning, because I couldn't find anything. I thought I'd like to find out myself, and that's really how it began.
I got you. Now, so with that question, why, let me ask you, why do stories work? Big question, I know.
That's a big question. Well, stories seem to me fundamentally, as important to us pretty much as breathing. And they are there because they allow us to share experience. So they forge a common bond with the person you're addressing, and you join in experience together, and you understand how the world is seen from the person outside yourself. I think there's a lot of interesting work being done at the moment about mirror neurons and the way that brainwaves. When you identify with a protagonist, your brainwave patterns start to reflect theirs. That seems to me really fascinating and really interesting. Is basically you step outside yourself and you see the world from somebody else's shoes, and I think that's what stories are fundamentally designed to do. The trick is to do them well, because the bad stories, like for all its skill, Black Mass doesn't work as a story because because there are no neurons firing. You don't care in the end, and you have to care. And so you go back again to what makes the story work, and what makes the story work is empathy.
It's so funny you say that. As you were talking and I was listening to your voice and your accent, I got to tell you this story about my wife, Michelle, and I. We were in Heathrow on our way to Amsterdam for some work I was doing with Arizona State University, and we had about a 6-hour layover in Heathrow. And it was during the middle of the day, so I started getting me some fish and chips and a pint or two or three. And we had just this wonderful waiter that was with us pretty much the whole time. And I found like halfway through that sitting, having those pints, whatever, that I started taking on like this British accent. And my wife is like, "What are you doing? Are you making fun of him?" I go, "No, what are you talking about?" And she goes, "You're talking in a British accent." And I go, "Oh my God, I don't know if it was the pints or my mirror neurons kicking in and having empathy, or being so caught up in the fact that I was out of the US and in foreign territory. I don't know, but I just cracked up and I thought, man, oh man, those mirror neurons are really powerful."
Yeah, no, it's a desire to fit in, isn't it? It's a very understandable one, and it's a very powerful instinct.
It really is. I was embarrassed for myself, and then I just laughed at myself because she thought I was making fun of him, and I didn't even hear it. I didn't even hear it coming out. But great stuff. Well, that's what I enjoyed so much about your book. And I have read McKee. I was fortunate to have Robert McKee on the show earlier in the year. Well, I guess in 2015. And he is, of course, a wonderful storyteller. I've had a chance to go through his 4-day story seminar and sit through his business seminar. So I've learned a lot with Robert. Sure. And I actually had a chance to sit in his living room in Connecticut, and we recorded a podcast a few years ago. So just a wonderful guy, very academic as far as Hollywood goes on it. Read Save the Cat and some of these others, Christopher Vogler's work, of course. But what I really found fascinating about yours, and I found it different, is how you were able to take the 3-act story and expand that then and really demonstrate how the 5-act story comes into play. Because, and why I find that interesting is I have a hard enough time boiling down and simplifying the 3-act approach to storytelling in business. And so I'm wondering, do you have any secrets for us on how do you simplify this so that people that aren't in TV and theater and radio day in and day out, but are, have to be communicators and leaders, how can they use this story in a very structured, in a very simple way to have an impact?
It's a very good question. I mean, what I normally boil it down to is, all stories are a quest, aren't they? All stories are a journey. So you always come back to, what does a character want? What's the problem? What's the goal that will solve the problem? And that works as well in business as it does in drama. When new writers write scripts, the note I write on the top of the scripts almost all the time is, what do they want? Your character is passive, your protagonist is passive. What's the goal? It's not clear. And I think once you present that to people, that there's a problem, and then the speaker or the fictional character goes in search of the problem, normally that thing clicks into place quite quickly. I mean, I think the extraordinary thing about storytelling, isn't it, is it is absolutely instinctive. I mean, I think much as I think these books are important, they're actually articulating an instinctive process. There's a very interesting attitude in England, which I don't think you get so much in the States, which is a lot of the top writers here are very, very skeptical about the study of story structure, and won't have anything to do with it at all. In fact, Russell T. Davies is one of them, but another one I work with is a very, very talented writer. I won't name him, but he said to me, I hear you've written a book, John. And I said, yeah, I have. And he said, jolly well done. He said, I shan't be reading it. And I said, well, thanks very much. I just said, well, why? He said, look, I'm scared that if I read that stuff, I'll start thinking about it, and I don't want to think about it because I just do it, and it's a very common attitude. So, 8 of the top 20 writers in the UK have never studied story structure or read a word about it in their lives. But of course, what is interesting about them all is they write perfect structure. And if you take a different writer, and I can name him, Jimmy McGovern, who's probably seen as the godfather of British television writing in this country. He's never studied structure in his life. His scripts are beautifully written, but more than that, he's almost, and I've been very fortunate to work with him over the years, all his scripts share an absolutely identical structure, down to the very page. The inciting incident always happens on the same page. The crisis always happens on the same page in everything he's written for the last 30 years. I tell him that and he gets furious, but he does it. And I think that's the thing we have to remember is actually, if you don't think about it, if you're in tune with that instinct, you just do it. We just sit down and we tell stories. I mean, without thinking to, I've just told you a story about Jimmy McGovern.
Exactly. Now, to me, though, John, those are the 1%ers. Those are the people that are just gifted at it. They've done it, and they've not let education and society and political correctness and social constructs get in their way of telling stories. But I think, man, my experience, the other 98, 99% of us need to have a pragmatic, intentional way to structure our thoughts, to get them down on paper. So that then we can take those and make a unique story out of it. We can switch them around. They don't actually have to happen, in the exact order that the hero's journey follows. I mean, certainly start with the inciting incident and then go to the backstory to help kind of explain things. But to me, I see this in our line of work too. There's a gentleman by the name of Paul Venables of Venables Bell and Partners in San Francisco. They do brilliant work, storytelling and advertising. And I saw this spot they did for Audi, and it was called the prom spot in the 2013 Super Bowl. And out of all the spots, it just blew me away. And I talk about it a lot on the show because I went and I looked at it and researched it. And I said, why is this such a strong spot? And I overlaid it on the hero's journey, or what we've boiled down to, we call the story cycle. It's a hybrid of the hero's journey, that a simplified way that I teach business folks how to use it.
Sure.
And it followed it, John, precisely. I mean, in order and everything. And then I was able to talk to Paul Venables on the phone, and I asked him one day about this. And I said, are you familiar with Joseph Campbell and the Hero's Journey? And there was a long pause. And he goes, well, yeah, maybe. No, not really. What? And I said, your spot follows essentially the hero's journey exactly. And he goes, well, we are innate storytellers. So, and we've fine-tuned our craft. They know it inside and out, but I think that underscores my hypothesis that we were all at the top of our storyteller games when we were in kindergarten. And since then,
True.
Our education, social climates, corporate environments have silenced that inner storyteller in us. And that's why, the work you're doing in Business Story and the telling and the work we do in it is to show them an intentional, pragmatic way to put this superpower to work for them.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there's the great quote from the painter Delacroix, which I think I use in the book, and he said, first learn to be a craftsman. It won't stop you from being a genius.
Oh, I love that.
Great,
John, I need to take a break right now and hear some of the wonderful stories from our sponsors. And when we come back, I would like to talk to you about this concept of drama being built on change. It's always about change. And again, how can business people understand and appreciate that change and incorporate it into their stories, to help advance their missions further, faster. So we'll be right back after this. Are you keeping track of sales leads in a spreadsheet? Or worse, Post-it notes all over your desk? Well, there's a better way, and it doesn't involve spending a fortune on complex CRM software. For over 25 years, ACT has been the #1 best-selling contact and customer management software. It's super affordable and easy to use. ACT helps individuals, small businesses, and sales teams organize prospect and customer details in one place. It helps market products and services more effectively, and most importantly, ACT drives sales. So try ACT free for 30 days by visiting actstory.com and sign up for a chance to win a pair of Bose Quiet Comfort 20i acoustic noise canceling headphones, a $299 value. Again, That's actstory.com. Hey, I've got a question for you. What's the best call to action button color on your website? Yeah, you probably didn't see that one coming, did you? Well, what's the best shape and sizes of your CTA buttons? And what copy gets more clicks? You know, these questions have interrupted my sleep patterns for weeks now, until I downloaded a helpful new email marketing guide from Emma called Why We Click: The Psychology Behind a Great Call to Action. You'll learn how applying just a little bit of brain science can transform your CTA buttons into small but mighty conversion powerhouses. It covers the button color, copy, and placement that helps skyrocket click rates. Check it out at myemma.com/click. You know, Emma helps marketers everywhere send smart, stylish email newsletters, promotions, and automated campaigns, and help us all rest a little easier knowing our email marketing is doing its job. So check out their new publication at myemma.com/click. Welcome back to Business' Story, and our guest with us today, all the way across the big pond in London, John Yorke, author of Into the Woods, an amazing book on story structure and how to use it in our lives. John, thanks again for being with us today on the show.
It's a pleasure.
So in your book, and now I've had the chance to actually read it twice, and it's going to go into my library, by the way. I've got a resource library on Business of Story at businessofstory.com, where whenever I'm presenting workshops and speaking on storytelling and business, people are always saying, what books have you read? Who should I go to for this? So I finally just created my whole resource library, and we'll be definitely including your book, Into the Woods, in that, and story structure section.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
No, it's great. So here's a question for you, and I pull straight from your pages. If all drama is built on change and the internal struggle a character must undergo to achieve it, then how can a brand or a business leader or a communicator use this elemental necessity of story to advance their companies or organizations? How do they use change in their work?
Well, it's a great question. All business seems to me, and all business communication seems to be about a strategy, isn't it? Strategy is everything, and strategy is the equivalent of the goal. You know, it's what does the character want? He wants, the lost ark. He wants the Holy Grail. What does the business want? It wants to be the biggest microchip industry in North America. How are we going to get there? Well, this is the strategy, and the strategy inevitably involves change, because you're not there at the moment. So to get there, you have to change. And so change becomes absolutely fundamental, as it is in fiction. You know, years ago, I used to sit there because for my job, I have to read a lot of scripts, and quite often they were by new writers. And I just got, you find yourself, you get bored. If they're not very good, you get bored. And I said, why am I bored? Well, and it suddenly hit me one day that I'm bored because nothing's changed. Mm-hmm. The moment information is repeated, the moment information is given to you again that you're already aware of, you start to zone out. It's really fascinating just how quickly and profoundly that happens. You're endlessly seeking new information, new stimulus. I mean, people talk a lot at the moment about iPhone addiction, or as they used to talk about crack bread, and think, oh no, it's a terrible thing. And there are arguments for that, but I think actually what people are presented with is the ability with modern technology to get new information, to get change all the time, and it's profoundly addictive. So as a business leader, what you're presenting is, this is where we need to get to. We're going to get here by doing this, and then doing this, and then doing this. So it's that incremental steps that lead to the goal that is, cast, that we must strive for, because if we achieve that, we will be on broad sunlit uplands once again. So that's why it's important. Is without change, you lose the audience. Apple's stock price dropped this week, and there's a lot of things like they need a new product because people are bored of the iPhone. Well, it's interesting, like how quickly these things turn on their head, and how much businesses actually rely on creating new.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about it and look at Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, and some of these other screenwriting formats, you're exactly right. It's all about that inciting incident, making the change in life and really confronting status quo, because without change, just on a business level, you lose relevance. If you are the same old company delivering the same old product as you just mentioned, and you are not either disrupting that market or the market is disrupting you and your customers, and you have a response to it, again, changing, confronting that status quo, then you really don't have a story. And one might argue you don't really have a very compelling business.
Well, that's right. I think, you only have to look at the lessons of Kodak or somewhere like that, or rank Xerox, to see what happens if things don't change.
Yeah.
Now there is a lot to be argued for about stability and understanding the power of a brand and the universal values of a brand, but those values are only reinforced by incremental change within that brand, it seems to me.
No, when I talk about story structure and the hero's journey, in fact, this happened just last week. I was doing a workshop for an NGO out here called the Sonoran Institute, and they had business leaders, really community leaders, and mayors and a chief of police and a sheriff and some sustainability folks in from Hurricane Utah and Wallace, Idaho. So two very remote towns, as it goes in the West here in America. And they had come down to Phoenix and had a 2-day session with the Sonoran Institute on working on how to build resilient communities. And I did this for them last year. I'm always the final workshop speaker, and I talked to them about communications and using story to be able to connect sometimes these, jargon-filled topics around sustainability and resiliency and how to get rid of that, and showing them this structure. And when I quickly took them through the hero's journey, I could see sort of the puzzlement on their faces. And I said, look it, you've lived it. You're living it right now. You started in your ordinary world in Hurricane Utah and Wallace, Idaho. You had a call to adventure. You had an invite to come down to Phoenix to, go to a new extraordinary world, to be exposed to some new content. And many of you in your introductions to me said you had reticence in doing it. You didn't really want to do it. You weren't sure it was going to be worth the money. You didn't know what you were going to learn from it. It was going to take you out of the office for 4 or 5 days. You were going to have all of this you would have to overcome and get caught up when you get back. And yet here you are. And it was in day 2, and they were saying they have loved it so far. They got all this information. They essentially were leveling up. They were dealing with their demons and their dragons down here. And they were returning the very next day with the boon, as I explained to them. And you are going to return back home to your community, smarter, wiser, faster, stronger, whatever. And that essentially is the hero's journey. It speaks of change, getting out of your comfort zone, confronting those dark forces inside of you, and then returning leveled up, if you will. And
I think that's absolutely right. Sorry, I interrupted you. Forgive me.
No, go for it.
Well, I think it's also story structure comes from real life, doesn't it? It's about real life. It's about my argument is 3-act structure is entirely based on the method by which you learn. Fundamentally, it mimics directly the process by which you assimilate new information. You exist, you're confronted by something strange, you assimilate lessons you want to from that, and then you change. So it seems absolutely fundamental where the life actually mimics story structure every day. And I think you also see that with mental illness, don't you? Is a classic sign of a healthy person is they wake up with an ambition for the day, with a plan, with a desire, with a strategy, and depression sets in when that disappears. So it seems fundamental to human existence and derived from the basic processes of human existence.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that 3-act play, and you talk about in your book too, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Yes. And a friend of mine, Randy Olson, who wrote a book that came out just a couple months ago, and in fact, you are mentioned in it, and your wonderful book is mentioned in it, called Houston, We Have a Narrative. And Randy teaches scientists how to be better at storytelling so that they can actually connect with their audiences. That old thing, no one cares how smart you are if I don't want to listen to you. And so That's the premise of his book, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And actually, the more you look at it, the more you realize that basically, if you see it as the thesis is you, the antithesis is every new stimulus you come across during the day, and the synthesis is the marriage between you and that stimulus, you see how that continually repeats itself in smaller and smaller and bigger units. That's how we assimilate knowledge, and that's how we learn. I mean, I think, it certainly wasn't a new thought from me. I think the first person I found writing about was Lajos Egri. I think that's the correct pronunciation, in the art of dramatic writing back in the 1920s. David Mamet certainly mentions it in his books, and I think actually Blake Snyder in Save the Cat touches on it as well. It's I think it's that thesis, antithesis, synthesis is how we experience the world. I always used to say to students, you come to this lecture, you listen, whether you agree with it or you disagree with it, you change, and that's it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. I don't know if you're familiar with author Lisa Cron and her book Wired for Story. She teaches authors how story structure at UCLA and why our minds, why our brains are hardwired for story. And there's a lot of parallels, of course, with what she talks about in her book and your book. And something you said early, where in the show, where our brains are all about survival. And it's story is important to our survival as breathing is to our lungs in survival. Yeah. And she has a great line that says, story is actually more important than our opposable thumbs for where we are in this day and age, because, it kept us from getting eaten by the saber-toothed tigers and whatever, and, where we are today. So when I see it around us, and in your book, too, you have many, many great case studies. Now, I want to ask you, as a business leader, communicator, watching movies, next time we go to the theater or we plug something in from Netflix, what can we learn if we're watching movies like Thelma and Louise, A Few Good Men, Chinatown, Star Wars, The Lion King, many of these movies mentioned in your books, but when we sit down there as a student of story that we could apply in our business lives, what could we be looking for to pull away from those?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think there's all kinds of things, but you name films that immediately trigger off big emotional connections. They're all films of featuring characters who've become part of your lifestyle, part of your culture, part of you. And that is the power of story. A story effectively is the absolute identification with the person who features in it. And I think it's the power too of archetypal structure. Every film you talk about there is very archetypally structured. At its heart, it's a very simple, the character exists, they have a problem, something happens that makes them confront that problem. They go on a journey with a specific goal to deal with that problem, and at the end, they vanquish their foe. That parallel to business is identical, isn't it? It seems to me like anyone running a business, a business exists, you have a problem, something makes you confront that problem, you have to strategize, and then finally you confront and overcome that problem. And, at the risk of sounding a bit 1970s in James Bond terms, if you win the problem, you get the girl.
I like that. You win the problem, you get the girl.
Or in Jane Eyre, you get the boy. I mean, it's like It works both ways.
There you go, and you return with the boon and so forth.
Exactly, it's all the same thing. They're all metaphors for the same thing, and that's what I love about it, and find it so extraordinary.
Well, let's take one more break, and when we come back, John, I want to talk about your now role in business storytelling and what you are bringing to us business communicators and how we can get better at it. And when we get back, I would like to have you talk about what are the 1, 2, or 3 major mistakes we're making that we can easily fix in how we approach our storytelling in business. So we'll be back right after this. Hey, if you like what you're hearing here on Business of Story, then you are going to love Definitive, the email from Convince and Convert that many marketers say is the most useful resource around. Each day, the team at Convince and Convert picks a topic and sends you the 3 best resources ever created about that topic. It's topical, it's timely, it's useful, so go to definitivedigest.com and subscribe for free right now. To tell effective business stories means to truly understand your audience, beckon them in with a story they care about, convert them into a customer, and then nurture that relationship for lifelong brand bonding. That's not always easy to do, but marketing automation has made it easier than ever. The challenge is, how do you take all that data and turn it into drama? Well, the marketing gods over at Oracle Marketing Cloud have done that for us. They've created this easy-to-read and easy-to-digest guide called Marketing Automation Simplified Guide. It offers an introduction to the 5 tenets of modern marketing and breaks down the tips marketers need to know to automate and optimize. This includes data in targeting, email marketing, lead nurturing, lead scoring, content marketing, and sales enablement. So to get your free Oracle Marketing Cloud Guide, Marketing Automation Simplified, go to bit.ly/Oracle Automation. That's bit.ly/Oracle Automation, and start getting your brand story straight. Welcome back to Business of Story, and our guest this week, John Yorke, author, producer, writer, and now a business storytelling consultant. And I don't even know if I should say "and now." I'm just putting that at the end of a 30-year career. I don't know how long you've been doing business story consulting, John.
For a couple of years. It's something that just grew naturally out of the television and then the writing. Businesses started to come to me and saying, how can we apply this? And I'd never actually really thought about it, but the minute you think about it, of course, this is obvious. And if stories are about communication, then business is all about communication. So the lessons are numerous, and there are fantastic parallels. Everything is about communication and winning people over, isn't it?
It really is. And what do you see? What are the top mistakes that business communicators make that you've learned through the theater world that we can be using to be more powerful, more compelling?
Overcomplication is the main one. Storytelling at its heart, big popular storytelling at its heart is really, really simple. The most powerful stories, if you look at the top 10 films of all time, there's a very clear good guy, there's a very clear bad guy, and there's a very clear goal, and there's a very clear prize at the end. I think, in business, whether you're selling something, whether you're writing a commercial, or whether you're making a speech to your workforce or delivering a PowerPoint presentation, those things are absolutely key. Is you are presenting information in terms of a story, which in fact you're presenting information in terms of a battle that must be won for all our sakes. So simplicity is really key, because once you lose an audience, you never get them back. And you've got to be entertaining. You've got to keep people interested. I think, there's a famous quote from the legendary British author E.M. Forster, who wrote Passage to India and Howard's Way, amongst many others. And he said, the only thing that matters in story is, I'm paraphrasing, is to create the feeling, to create the question in the reader's mind, what happens next? And that seems to be absolutely key is when you're presenting information in a way that is intriguing and makes the audience ask further questions. So the worst thing you can do when you're telling a story or communicating in business is spell everything out. Just like in fiction, what you've got to do is intrigue and arouse curiosity. Use all the techniques that make people go, I can't turn off, I can't turn over, I've got to keep listening. All those techniques, those are the things that I think in business people don't get so readily. And I think that's a bit of a problem. There's a wonderful quote I quote a lot because I just think that other people say it much better than I do, but Tom Stoppard, the playwright Tom Stoppard, he says, the essential art of the playwright is the ordering of the flow of information. It's easy to misjudge. Too much is bad, too little is bad. The amount might be in the wrong order. And it's how you release information, and when you release it in a way that makes people go, I want to know what happens next. Well, you're not telling me everything. What you're doing is you're inciting questions in the listener. And I think those techniques, which are not technically structured, but they're the techniques of fiction, become as important. And every great political orator does that as well. You don't give the answer until the end.
And in developing that intrigue, does that play back to what you mentioned in your book too? Andrew Stanton, one of the founders of Pixar, creator of Toy Story, Finding Nemo, talked about that 2 + 2 = 4, that you have to have your audience involved versus standing up in front of them with charts and graphs and data and just giving them massive amounts of exposition. And this happened, and this happened, and this happened.
Absolutely. I mean, Andrew Stanton is brilliant on this. The 2 + 2 thing is absolutely him. And there's a marvelous lecture online that's well worth tracking down when he talks about the writing of Toy Story.
Is that the TED Talk where he starts off with that rather off-color joke?
It may be. I think I saw it. It was listed as Harvard under what I saw.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'll check it out.
Well, the TED Talk is wonderful, but I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
No. It's but he does talk brilliantly about story structure, because it's interesting. It's something he discovered as he was writing, and I think it's exactly that. Is a PowerPoint presentation where the speaker just reads what's on the PowerPoint is boring, because there's nothing for the listener to do. I use PowerPoint a lot, but what I've done over the years is I don't write what I'm saying. I put pictures on it. And the pictures work as a prompt for me, which is handy in case I get lost. But it also allows the audience to have a visual image for everything I'm saying. It could just be the person who's saying it, but it means they're actively thinking, they're actively involved. And that's the trick, is you want people to do it for you. You want them to get to the conclusion. There's nothing worse than being told. The great power comes from the belief that you've got there yourself. And the trick of the great speaker is you tell people in such a way as they don't realize they're being told. They get there themselves.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, John, you've given us so much great insight into story structure and storytelling. Where can we learn more about you, your courses, and how can we take advantage of your wisdom, your 30 years of being in the storytelling business?
Oh, you're very kind. I think you are the pioneer in this area, so I should be thanking you. I have an online course, a Storytelling for Business course, and that's accessible on johnyorkstory.com. So it's readily findable on the internet. And we do an online course for any groups, whatever size.
And to be clear, that's John Yorke, Yorke. For
That's
us American
correct,
listeners that aren't, paying attention to the Queen's English, I guess, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. Any parting thoughts for us? What is one last nugget that we could share with our gang out there to make us better storytellers as soon as they're done listening?
The thing someone just said to me years ago is it's within you. It's all there. People said, I can't give a speech. I can't stand up in public. I can't talk. I wouldn't know how to do it. You do know how to do it. Part of it is practice, but the biggest part of it all is self-belief, because the story structure is fundamental and as intrinsic as it's part of our DNA. It's there. So be confident, be brave, study it, and you'll master it.
I think that's brilliant. And that comes back to the earlier point of follow a pragmatic, intentional path in doing this. And even if it feels maybe a little awkward at first, at least you're getting your content, the importance of the various elements of content. And then you can start having that freedom to move it around and change the timing of it within the story as you feel fit, but to be intentional and pragmatic. That's what I try to tell our students and our clients is, this is not so much of a formula as it is just kind of a form to get you going, and then let that inner storyteller kick in and do its thing. That one that was silenced in kindergarten. All we want to do is reignite that true superpower of storytelling.
Absolutely. Couldn't put it better.
Well, John, thank you so much for being on the Business of Story. I really, really have enjoyed it. Great way to kick off our week here. And for all of you listening in, thank you again for joining us here. I think this is our 30th episode now. And I was talking to a gentleman last week that says, if you get past episode number 15, then you really got something. And I thought, all right, man, we're twice that far. So this is pretty cool. And I just love having you on the program.
It's a real pleasure.
And for the rest of you, as you know, we've got lots of storytelling tools at businessofstory.com, plus the library that I mentioned earlier, including John's book in that. And I welcome you to come and visit Business of Story and start honing that talent, innate talent of being a business storyteller. Of course, if you like what you're hearing, please go to iTunes and give us your 5-star rating, or 4-star, or heaven forbid 3-star. Anything less than that, don't bother. And then share with us what you like about the show and what else you would like to have us covered. It's just great to be here. And I'm following my passion as I'm learning from this and learning from the true story artists like John Yorke in the world. And I just continue to bring you these fine folks every week. So thank you again for listening in on the Business of Story. Join us again next Wednesday when we will have another wonderful guest. And until then, have a fabulous life.
Thanks for tuning in to the Business of Story. Don't forget there are terrific free storytelling resources for you at thebusinessofstory.com, where you'll also find the complete show archive. The Business of Story is sponsored by Oracle Marketing Cloud, Emma, ACT, and by Convince and Convert, and is produced by Convince and Convert Media. Find more great shows like The Business of Story at marketingpodcasts.com, the first search engine for marketing podcasts.